Welcome to Agents of Change, the podcast that highlights the individuals driving sustainable change in manufacturing. I'm Gemma, your host, and today I sit down with Alex West, Senior Principal Analyst at Omdia. Alex works within the Manufacturing Technology Group at Omdia. He specialises in Industrial Internet of Things and the technologies that are transforming the manufacturing sector, with a strong emphasis on digital transformation and sustainability. Alex's work involves tracking innovations across both process and discrete industries, providing insights into how digital technologies enable sustainable practices in manufacturing. Omdia is a global technology research firm that offers data-driven insights and consulting services, helping businesses navigate complex technological landscapes and improve decision-making. In this episode, I ask Alex to share his insights into the current state of sustainability within the manufacturing sector, examining the progress companies have made and the challenges they continue to face. We'll discuss the drivers behind the urgency for businesses to address their environmental footprint and how current economic conditions impact investment decisions relating to sustainability. Alex talks about the importance of collaboration, leadership buy-in, strategy and long-term investment. We explore the role of digital transformation and Industry 4.0 technologies in reducing emissions and improving efficiency. In this episode, we're covering a lot of ground, so instead of asking him my usual "tell me about your background" question, I'm going to get straight into it by asking Alex, what is the current state of play for manufacturing companies on their sustainability journey?
Well, thanks for having me first and foremost, Gemma. Great to be with you today. And I think, to your point, manufacturing is a huge contributor to global emissions, very significant, also around energy consumption. According to the IEA, I believe they account for something in the region of 37% of total global energy use. So when we're looking at a lot of these initiatives, the manufacturing sector is so important to that transition to sort of global net zero. So in terms of really where we see companies are, I mean, the short answer is we're just getting started and a long way to go. But in terms of a longer answer, I think we're seeing a lot of companies starting to make commitments and setting targets. So if you look at science-based target initiatives, commitments and targets there have grown exponentially over the last couple of years. And so people are making these commitments, but what we've seen is that a lot of these targets are quite short-term. So we found about somewhere around 90% of all targets that are being set with the SBTI are only up until 2030. So it's got kind of a short-term view.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, it limits the amount of impact that's targeted. So only about a fifth of the targets that are being set are to support a reduction in emissions of more than 50%. So again, it's that we've got a short-term plan, but we're still working on the long-term. So in terms of some of the discussions and analysis we've done, we found that companies are quite evenly split in terms of their rollout of technology and strategy. So we found about a third of companies have like a real long-term roadmap. They've already begun implementation, sort of they're going. About another third are sort of still working on that short-term introductions of their plans, and the plans may be a bit more short-term. And then about the final third are really still in the assessment phase, trying to figure out where to go, what to invest in and what to be doing. So that's in terms of their planning, but then we've looked at this in terms of how well they're doing in terms of meeting these sort of some of these targets they're setting. And it's, that can vary very much depending on the metrics, that you could be talking about reducing emissions, you can be talking about reduction in waste or water consumption, transitioning to renewable energy, for example. And so we've really found that how well companies perceive they're doing varies a lot by these metrics. But definitely some of the most important ones are, emissions is certainly front and centre. I think a lot of people have got this sort of carbon tunnel vision. We found there that a lot of companies are struggling. So about a fifth of companies believe they were ahead of target, double that believe they were behind target. And we think of transitioning to renewable energies as well. There we found that about a half of all companies were either slightly or significantly behind target. So again, going to my short answer, it's really a lot of companies have started, they're looking into this. but it's a complex challenge, and there's still, for the majority of companies, a very long way to go.
Yeah, and that sounds, Alex, a bit like it's fragmented as well at the moment, that actually the data and the metrics are fragmented. Has that got something to do with the answer in terms of sort of bringing everything into a holistic view?
Yeah, I mean, I think it highlights that there's a difference between intention and reality. So there's lots of companies that want to make changes. There's lots of companies that are starting to do it. But it's difficult. It's really tough.
Yeah.
Sustainability is relatively new in terms of companies really implementing it in their business, and so there's a lot of things they need to get in place to be able to do it. So, yeah, I think the intention is there, but the actual application and realization of some of these changes, that our data shows that that's kind of where the disconnect is.
Yeah. So what are the drivers then that are pushing companies to look at their sustainability right now?
Yeah. So really, the motivating factors, you've got one of your core motivating factors is just that corporate social responsibility. It's just the right thing to do. So a lot of companies we speak to, they realise, going back to that earlier point, manufacturing is a big contributor to environmental impact, and they see themselves having a personal responsibility. So there is that initial, it's the right thing to do. We should be making improvements, but there are also a number of others. It's both sort of the carrot and the stick. There's benefits in terms of if you're a more sustainable business, typically you're a more efficient business, you have less waste, you're running more efficiently, so that impacts your bottom line. So there's a cost benefit to being more sustainable. But then you've got external pressures as well. So if you think of some of the consumer facing industries, especially there's a real challenge in terms of customer pressure. Customers want to buy from companies that are sustainable. You see a lot of pressure from various stakeholders. You see a lot of litigation taking place at the moment, challenging companies that aren't believed to be operating as sustainably as they could be. So there's that brand reputation and customer pressure we see. There's also pressure from the supply chain as well. So if you look at the other stakeholders, taking Apple for an example. So Apple have made a commitment that they want to see 100% carbon neutral products and supply chain by 2030. Well, if they want a carbon neutral supply chain, that means their partners have to be doing this as well. They have to be carbon neutral, and if you want to work with Apple, that means as a company you need to then be carbon neutral. So big customers are putting pressure on their vendors to say, look, you need to follow suit in terms of if you want to keep working with us. And I would say, so probably the final one, and this is one we think that is going to have more teeth over the next 6 months and a year, is that around legislation.
Yeah.
And so we see a lot of legislations coming out, varying by region. So in general, these are requiring for sort of financial grade reporting of environmental impact. Mm-hmm. If you look at the US, you've got the SEC climate disclosure rules. So these are rules that require reporting of emissions and environmental impact. You've got something similar in the EU, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. These are both requiring emissions reporting, but interesting, what we've seen in both of these is there's been a little bit of a pushback. So, for example, the climate disclosure rules is kind of stuck in court at the moment. A lot of discussion around what those regulations will finally look like. If you look at the CSRD in Europe, the EU has positioned it, but a lot of the member countries haven't rolled that into sort of national law. So there's no real penalty for not conforming. So both of those are a little bit in the middle in terms of coming and going. And so one thing in terms of legislation we've really seen impact is California. So California's made certain commitments around the need to report assured Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions and climate risk, and that's by 2026. That was challenged, and the challenges were pushed back, and that's in force. So California, we really see in terms of areas and nations, regions where if you're a Californian company, you really have to get on board.
Yeah, and I think what you just said, going back a little bit there about Apple, regardless of legislation, if you want to be part of Apple's supply chain and Volkswagen's and, all of these other companies that are going to put that emphasis on their supply chain, regardless of your local legislation or politics, that's going to have a huge impact, isn't it? It's going to have a huge influence.
Cost of doing business. So we often talk about it as, there's the costs of doing, the benefits of doing, like, you can see maybe operational benefits from running more efficiently, but there's the cost of not as well. Maybe you don't see that immediately, but you've really, when you're planning this, you've got to look at both now and a few years down the line to, what is the impact if you're not a sustainable organisation.
So, Alex, what are some of the challenges that are being faced on that journey to sustainability then?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the start, this isn't easy. This is a difficult thing to do. Lots of companies are sort of just early on the journey. So one of the big things we found is just that strategy is an issue. Where to invest, what are the priorities, how do you balance those priorities? When you're looking at your plans, are you looking at more tactical, short-term wins, or are you planning more strategic, long-term targets and projects? So we really see that strategy and leadership playing out as one of the main areas, and tied to leadership also is just dealing with competing priorities. So you've got companies that sustainability is important, but then so is operations, so other sort of parts of the business. And sometimes it's a case of sustainability, or the CSO, for example, the Chief Sustainability Officer, really trying to influence without a lot of authority. So operations is always crucial. We've got to make, we've got to produce, we've got to be profitable. That's usually going to be the main priority. So how do you embed sustainability in as part of that, when sometimes some of these priorities in other departments might be competing? So that's one of the issues, is strategy and leadership. I think building upon that, there's also just the availability of resource. That can be finances and the opportunity, the sort of investments. You're dealing a lot of time with manufacturing company with a lot of legacy assets, old equipment that maybe wasn't the most sustainable when it was designed. So how do you make these solutions more efficient? With that comes that balancing of an upfront cost. How much are you willing to invest upfront on bringing in more sustainable technology? And then you've also got the skill sets. So, now all of a sudden these companies are being asked to do audits, reporting, life cycle assessments. You've got to do regulatory compliance. A lot of these are new skill sets that companies have got to bring in. We found that only about a third of companies believed they had all the skills that they needed in-house. But the challenge is it's not as easy as just going out and getting them, because demand is growing at almost double that of supply in terms of sustainability skills. So how you bring in those skills is also important. And I'd say one final thing, and this is really more of a technology challenge, is do you have the data? So for companies to improve, really you need a benchmark. You need a point of measurement, and then you need to be able to get some visibility on what's happening. And so a lot of companies don't have great access to the data that really helps them to make informed environmental decisions, like their emissions, even like their energy consumption, how much energy is being consumed by different assets. A lot of companies just know how much energy is coming through into the factory at a utility level and no more. So drilling down and getting data so that you can make data-driven decisions is also sort of a challenge that we think manufacturing companies are facing.
Yeah. I say, somebody had told me something that they were working on where they've got these devices that fit to all their machines, and they give real-time data into the energy consumption now that piece of technology didn't exist 5 years ago, so innovation is going to rise to the challenge, isn't it, when it comes to this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there is that technology. And going to that point of that technology, imagine if you can start adjusting your production to the cost of energy. So as energy prices fluctuate, you can adjust your production. So that real-time information is useful. I think a lot of times, though, it's the technology isn't the issue, it's the people. You've got to implement that technology. You've got to get people to believe in that technology. It's more often than not, technology is in place. And the people are the ones that, that's why a lot of these companies are investing in change management as well.
Absolutely, because it is exactly that. It is change management, isn't it? And it's change management from the top as well. Like you just pointed out, if there isn't enough leadership buy-in, your chief sustainability officer doesn't perhaps have. They need the backing of the people at the top in order to help that message be taken seriously across the business.
Yeah, I mean that justifies your investment. You need your senior leadership for the investment. You need them to help sort of push through certain changes. But I think we see, interestingly, a lot more senior execs are having sustainability tied to their compensation. So they'll have certain sustainability targets in their BU that they have to meet in order to fulfill all their compensation. So it's getting there, I would say.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit earlier on in this episode about investment plans. I'm just interested to know how current economic challenges are impacting those investment plans. You sort of alluded to this already, but are companies looking then to allocate this investment to quick returns, or are we starting to see some long-term project investment?
Mm-hmm. I think what we've seen is that traditionally sustainability is almost inversely correlated to the market health. So we found that when the market's doing well, things like emissions intensity, energy consumption, improvement, efficiency is really improved. And then when the market goes downhill, obviously everything is focused on the bottom line. So with where we are today, I think we're somewhat buffering against that. We still see companies making investments. The challenge is how much are they willing to invest. So we saw only very few companies planning to reduce their spend and investment. But when you're looking at the sort of investment that's needed, less than a quarter of companies were expecting to make more than a 10% increase in their investment. So again, is that really enough to change the way you're doing business? And again, that goes to that short term and long term. You can make some short term benefits. You can make some investment in LED lighting, save some electricity there, save some energy consumption. But what's the real long term investments that are needed? And so I think in the UK here, there's a recent example in Port Talbot where Tata Steel have just made a £1.25 billion investment in electric arc furnaces. These are not small pieces of investment. So sometimes it's balancing that tactical and strategic, and really to get over to the hump of where we need to go. There's going to be the need for some really big spend. I mean, in that case, granted, the Port Talbot plant was supported by government subsidies, but that is the real challenge. That at the moment, I think a lot of companies that they want to show some quick wins. They're also wanting to ensure there's a very quick ROI on some of these investments, and that means some of the longer term strategic investments are maybe a little bit behind.
Is there then, Alex, for the companies, the few companies, let's say, who are thinking long term, have they then got an advantage in that, this is a one-way street regardless, and obviously there's all of these contributing factors like the economy, but we also know from earlier on in this conversation, you talked about how it impacts recruitment because people want to work for a business that takes their social responsibility properly. It's going to help with customers and being part of the supply chain and all those benefits. So is it fair to say that the companies who do think long term are going to have a competitive advantage then, because eventually everyone is going to have to make more meaningful progress? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, companies are going to have to be there, and companies that have already, pushed forward in terms of their environmental impact, they're using that in a lot of their branding. They're highlighting that we're a sustainable company. So it's being used already as a market differentiator in some cases. And like you say, there's the cost of not. People might not see it immediately, but down the road there's legislation. You'll have carbon taxes coming in as well and changing the price point of products. So if you don't, you're going to be behind. I'd say the only caveat to that is that first mover advantage. If you adopt some new technologies, maybe 5-10 years down the line, something newer comes in. But that's a risk in any type of investment. So
Definitely. So how then can digital transformation industry 4.0 concepts help to reduce the environmental footprint of manufacturing companies?
yeah, so we mentioned earlier, technology is the forefront. It's not always the technology that's the limitation. It's deploying it and getting people to work with it. But if you look at really what we're thinking about for digital transformation, the foundation of that is really getting good data. So a lot of manufacturing companies, data's still collected on paper. Paper can be lost. People can write down data, erroneously, and that messes up the calculations. That means you're not basing any decisions on really good data. So I think we really see digital transformation as a starting point, providing data more accurately, more frequently to support that decision making. What that means in terms of real applications is really broad. So it can be optimizing your energy use. That can be like energy management systems where you're looking at which assets are consuming more energy. You can balance your production to tie in with cost of energy. You can balance your production to ensure it's optimized to run most sustainably and minimize emissions. Can be used in quality management. So you get companies that are, for example, using machine vision cameras to monitor the production of certain products, identifying very early on in the production any defaults, and then sort of repairing those or sort of taking them out of production before any more energy or materials placed on them. One of the other applications is around predictive maintenance, and that's really around monitoring the health of assets to predict when they're going to fail and make sure that you can repair those degrading assets at an optimal time. And so that can eliminate unplanned downtime. Unplanned downtime can be a real difficulty for manufacturers. If your facility or your production site line breaks down unplanned, then there's additional costs in terms of amount of energy and ramping it back up. It can be a very inefficient process. It can result in a lot of waste. So there's a lot of ways that companies are using data to make more informed decisions. And I think in the long term, the really exciting thing, I don't think many companies are really there, even from the technology vendor side, in terms of offering this, but it's providing that holistic picture. So imagine you can get the data that helps you make an informed decision on when to produce a product so that it's maybe more energy efficient or it's using cheaper energy, but then also making a decision on what materials to use and what impact the use of those materials might have in terms of the cost of production, the sustainability of those products, the impact on the supply chain. And as you're getting all this information together, now you can make a real decision that looks at your production, it looks at your profitability, and it also looks at your sustainability. And you can really optimize those different metrics according to your sort of strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And so often in these conversations that I'm having, Alex, I always say two parts of the same coin, but actually it's like a coin with many different parts, because it is all part of the same conversation, isn't it? Cost reduction, efficiency, sustainability. These all do integrate nicely into one another. You've started to answer this kind of question in the last answer anyway, but I just want to know, in terms of companies who are at the very beginning and maybe they are feeling overwhelmed for all of the reasons that we've talked about in those challenges, where can you suggest that they start if they're wanting to get started with sustainability? What is the best starting point?
I think the first point is just get started. So there's a lot of paralysis by analysis. There's so many different things to measure. There's so many things, do we look at emissions? Do we look at water or waste? So it's starting by a bit of planning. What areas does your company feel it has the most negative environmental impact? And that will vary a lot by industry sector. Yeah. So some industries are very energy intensive, others consume a lot of water. So it's having that plan. And then, as we touched on earlier, it's really looking at both a short-term and a long-term plan. So for some companies, especially where you've got shareholder pressure, there's that pressure to provide an immediate ROI, you've got to show benefit. But it's really got to be tied into business performance. So as you're making investments in sustainability, are they having a benefit to your business as well? There's a quote I like, it says, "You can't be so woke you go broke." You know, the reality is, as much as you want to be a more sustainable organisation, you still have to stay afloat and be profitable. So it's considering decisions that bring these two together. And then as we mentioned earlier, it's over the long term. It's not just what is it doing in the next 6 months, but what are these decisions going to mean in terms of you being in business in 5 years' time as well. I'd say one final point I'd say is just collaboration is crucial. It's collaboration across different business units, it's getting buy-in, it's sharing education, providing training. That can be within an organisation, but even across different stakeholders. We mentioned the supply chain earlier. Apple, for example, if it wants you to be sustainable, it will be providing resources, training, sharing skills and best practices to help its vendors to also operate more sustainably as well.
Definitely, it's in their best interest, isn't it, to do so. And also, as well, I guess making sure that leadership are part of it, of the piece from the beginning, because, like you said right back at the beginning, you know, there has to be real leadership around sustainability for it to get off the ground. And I guess anybody out there who's looking to appoint someone responsible for sustainability, make sure that it's clear that it's coming from leadership and that it has the backing of leadership.
And keeping it connected. We don't want to have lots of departments running lots of individual projects, and no real insight into the overall impact on the business. So you really do need, from the top down, holding people accountable, trying to get some measurability to the impact of these decisions, and sharing, working together, collaboration, which again senior leadership really enable.
Yeah. So, Alex, we're at the very end of the episode. I've got one last question to ask you. Obviously, this episode is forming part of the mini-series that Mansus is doing with the Sustainable Manufacturing Expo, which is taking place in Anaheim in February. Why is this show so important, Alex, and why are you excited to be part of the show?
I think this show's really aimed at addressing some of the challenges we've already talked about. So many different things going on. You've got to stay on track on all the legislations. There's new technologies coming out. There's all these skill sets that people need to have. And how do you bring together this all, and how do you learn best practices? So I think this show really hits the target there in terms of getting people together around expertise, knowledge of new technology, knowledge of new approaches, and creating that community where this knowledge can be shared. People can introduce different ways of doing things, build those sort of partnerships and collaborations. I think also Anaheim is a very interesting location. I mentioned earlier, California is really at the forefront, we see now globally, in terms of supporting sustainability, especially with its legislations. And so the location as well really ties in local manufacturing companies. This is must there. Californian manufacturers under more pressure than arguably any other region in the world. So it's a great opportunity to learn, meet lots of people in the industry, and really share best practices.
Mansus will be there in February to support the Sustainable Manufacturing Expo. Thank you to Alex for coming and having this insightful conversation with me today. It's clear from what he's shared with us that there is no easy or obvious way forward when it comes to driving sustainable change in manufacturing. But one thing is for sure, change is necessary. If you have ideas, vision, solutions to help us move towards a more sustainable future in manufacturing, we want to hear from you. You can find out more about becoming a guest on Agents of Change by heading to mansus.co. Thank you for listening. See you next time.